There is no more debate. We live in the greatest time to be alive, and it's not even close. Global poverty and crime have been plummeting for decades, education's on the rise, literally by every available metric, we're better off than our ancestors. But there's this weird paradox that's occurring. The better things get, the worse we seem to feel. So today I'm going over how we got here, where it's all going, and how one stupid mistake led to the crippling of an entire generation. The year is 1960. Psychology is still this relatively new field. We're fresh off the back of Freud's work on the ego, childhood trauma, and frankly him oversharing about his mother. But now, scientists want to try and use this field to create a citizenry of happy, healthy, hardworking people, a kind of superior society. It sounds bad, but it was a different time. Or was it? Anyway, enter Nathaniel Branden, the guy who created the idea of the self-esteem. Now, Nathaniel and his colleagues study a group of people to try and find out what makes people different, what makes people perform better, and they find one inextricable link from all those people who were doing amazing at various different categories. And that is that all of them had a really high self-esteem. And so they conclude that people with high self-esteem tend to do better in all these different areas. And they try to spread the message everywhere. They publish books, they give seminars. When people feel better, they do better. And it's fair to say that the world got the message. So the education system changes overnight. We want to make students feel as good as possible, so we introduce the idea of participation trophies. We don't want anyone to feel bad for coming last. We have safe spaces so people don't have to feel negative emotions, and we even dropped testing standards from a bunch of top-tier universities so people don't have to deal with the failure of not getting the test results they want. And it's not long before the media follows suit. Countless books are sold on manifestation, good vibes, happiness. The Secret alone sells 30 million copies. Hollywood's the exact same. The movies center around people finding their one true love, their happily ever after, and even TV shows have trigger warnings at the start in case anything bad happens in the show. We want to make people feel as good as possible, which doesn't just mean making them feel good, but also taking away all the bad. As Nathaniel Branden told us, when people feel good, they do good. But there was a huge problem. The data was backwards. So, some researchers aren't exactly convinced by Branden's findings, and they seem too good to be true, so they decide to look at 1,600 participants to see if they can replicate his findings. They notice something that the more eagle-eyed amongst you may have also caught on to. So, when Branden conducted the study, he found that there was a link between people with high self-esteem and people who perform better. Now, common sense would tell you that correlation is not causation. I mean, I don't think Nicolas Cage is drowning people just because whenever he releases a movie, more people drown in pools. That's actually true, by the way. But also, common sense would tell us that if there is a link between these two things, that it's the reverse of what Branden concluded. People, when they perform better, tend to have a higher self-esteem as a result, and then that compounds over time. But when researchers tried to test Branden's theory, they found that when you actually inflate people's self-esteem, they perform worse in school, perform worse in tests, and are actually more violent than people that you do nothing for. When people actually achieve things and feel they've done something, they feel better about themselves. But here's a shocker. Telling people they should only feel good all the time has had some pretty horrific results. But before we get into that, it's worth knowing that this kind of misinformation is everywhere. Everywhere you turn, there's people trying to convince you of things to align with their specific agenda. Which is why I reached out to the people at Ground News to sponsor this. For those of you who don't know, Ground News is this website and app that lets you look at coverage from both the left, the right, and the center, giving you a breakdown of their political bias, who owns the company, and how generally factual they are. But my favorite feature is the blind spot feature, which lets you look at the stories that the left and the right aren't willing to cover. For example, only 8% of the left is covering the Biden staffer who came out and said they were gaslighting the public the entire time about his cognitive decline. And meanwhile, the right isn't covering the Trump allies who are quietly demoting the people who worked on the January 6th case. I think it is so important what these guys are doing in a world that could not be more politically divided. So if you're someone who's serious about being informed and knowing what they're talking about, you can get 40% off the Vantage plan, which is the one I use, at the link in the description. It also helps out the channel. So thanks again to Ground News for sponsoring this video. The link is in the description, and back to past me. So, what has been the result of 60 years of telling people they should only feel good all the time? Well, for a start, Gen Z have more than double the rates of anxiety and stress as baby boomers. On top of this, a 2023 report showed 61% of Gen Z having been diagnosed with an anxiety condition. People feel hopeless and horrible about the way the world is today, and is it any wonder? We've taken away so much pain and stress and anxiety from people's lives that the relative perception when they do see things that are bad that are going on. It's just more than their brains can handle. People are finally being exposed to the realities of war, both from Ukraine and the Middle East, and they literally don't know what to do with this information. You know, it's a sad reality, but civilians die in war. There's horrific things that happen all the time. As much as this is the best time to be alive, there's still horrible things that happen that we're barely ever exposed to. Millions died in the Rwandan genocide. There's millions of people in concentration camps in China right now, and there are more slaves today than there ever have been before. But we're so comfortable, we're so pain-free that this relative change is just more than we are able to deal with. Just like a muscle, when it's not exposed to heavy weight, becomes weak, whenever our minds aren't exposed to a certain degree of stress and pain, they become extremely fragile. It's so bad that people are searching online for how to get rid of emotions like anxiety or stress, or how to feel certain ones like confidence, as opposed to being just nervous about things. These are regular human emotions that we're supposed to experience, we're supposed to go through. Don't get me wrong, I'm all for removing pain. I love a hot coffee, a hot bath, and a warm bed just as much as the next guy. And I'm not suggesting that we go out and live like Liver King, working out in the cold, sleeping on a wooden bed, and taking thousands of dollars worth of exogenous testosterone. So what is it that I am suggesting? Well, the worst thing that's ever happened to you is the worst thing that's ever happened. And similarly, the worst thing you've been exposed to is the worst thing you've been exposed to. So I would recommend regularly consuming things like war movies or wildlife documentaries, where you see the reality of how most creatures, most people have experienced existence up until this moment, to kind of reset your mind and your expectations of the world. Try watching All Quiet on the Western Front and then bitching about how cold your coffee was today. Or try watching a wildlife documentary where you see how most animals in the wild live in the cold, just constantly being preyed on, and then tell me that Brenda from accounting is a total bitch. She is a total bitch though, to be fair, but you get my point. But on top of this, I would also suggest just regularly engaging in things that make you a little bit uncomfortable, whether that's weightlifting or cold plunges, or finally coming out of the closet and telling people who you really are.
What?
Nothing. Emotions are just feedback. The more comfortable we get with the negative emotions, the more we can embrace and appreciate the positive ones. Anyway, that's my rant for today. The YouTube overlords think that you're going to like this video, so that's it for me, and goodbye. Peace.